Jasmine Crockett came in ready for a fight, but when Pam Bondi hit her with facts she couldn't dodge, things spiraled fast in front of a live audience. No one expected the room to feel this tight. Capitol Hill had seen its fair share of tense moments, but something about this hearing buzzed under the surface like a pot just shy of boiling over. The morning air outside was humid, thick with anticipation, and the marble halls inside the Rayburn House office building didn't help. It wasn't just another policy discussion. This one had faces attached. Damage, fires, arrests. At 9:01 am, Attorney General Pam Bondi stepped into the hearing room wearing a pale blue blazer, calm but firm. She wasn't here to dance around issues. Her focus was razor sharp, her demeanor steady. She exchanged a few words with the staffers, placed a hand lightly on the folder she carried, then took her seat at the witness table without a glance at the cameras flashing around her. Across from her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, already flipping through her notes. Known for her quick comebacks and visible frustration with what she calls selective outrage, Crockett wasn't just showing up, she was ready for a showdown. Her aides had been whispering all morning, one even nervously pacing the hall before they were let in. The room was full. Congressional aides, reporters, and a few Tesla dealership owners quietly seated in the back. Their faces were tired, worn from weeks of cleaning graffiti and replacing windows after the recent attacks that had swept across multiple states. It hadn't just been one incident. This was organized, coordinated, and someone had to answer for it. Committee Chair Ronald Kilpatrick gavelled the room into order. This committee convenes today to address a troubling pattern of violence targeting Tesla facilities and personnel. We will hear testimony from the Attorney General of the United States, Ms. Pam Bondi. Bondi didn't waste time. Let me be clear, she began. We are not here today to debate the merits of electric cars or tech billionaires. We are here because in the last 30 days, 7 Tesla locations have been attacked, vandalized, firebombed, and in one case an employee was assaulted while locking up for the night. The air shifted. Bondi continued, her voice calm but undeniable. Federal authorities have made multiple arrests. These are not random acts of mischief. We're looking at coordinated criminal activity, potentially incited through online rhetoric and social media campaigns that blur the line between protest and violence. She let that sit. Crockett's pen stopped moving. For example, Bondi said. Flipping through a page on March 17, Representative Crockett hosted a live stream in which she referenced what she called a global day of action against Elon Musk, urging her viewers to make their presence known. Days later, a Tesla showroom in Chandler, Arizona was firebombed. Coincidence? Maybe, but we can't afford to play with fire and pretend it's rain. Crockett sat up straighter, her voice cut through the room. Madam Attorney General, are you suggesting that my speech caused that fire? Bondi didn't flinch. I'm saying that in positions like ours, words carry weight, and when tensions are high, we must all be mindful that our rhetoric doesn't become someone else's justification for destruction. The chair attempted to regain control. Let's allow each speaker their time, but Crockett pressed forward. You're cherry picking. I've condemned violence, but I also won't apologize for speaking out against individuals who use their power to hurt working families. Her voice was tight now, her knuckles gripping the edge of her desk. Bondi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Speaking out is one thing, framing it like a call to action without boundaries, without responsibility, that's something else entirely. From the back of the room, a Tesla dealership owner from Omaha leaned forward slightly in his seat. His daughter, the one who worked the front desk before the window shattered last week, was sitting beside him. Neither said a word, but they didn't have to. But Crockett wasn't finished, and the tension between them was just beginning to crack the surface. Crockett adjusted her mic and leaned in. So we're criminalizing criticism now, is that what this is? Her voice carried across the room, not loud but sharp, like someone pulling a string tight, daring it to snap. Bondi kept her eyes steady. She didn't blink. No one is criminalizing speech, Congresswoman, but when your words coincide with real-world violence, it's not unreasonable to ask questions. It's our responsibility to ask them. Crockett gave a dry laugh. You want to talk responsibility? Let's talk about the billionaires funding political cow and dodging taxes while working-class Americans drown in student debt and medical bills. Several members of the committee stirred. One of Crockett's aides whispered to something in her ear, but she waved him off. You don't get to hide behind law and order, she went on, when this government has failed to protect people from the very systems that individuals like Musk represent. Bondi calmly tapped her pen once on the table. Respectfully, Congresswoman, no one here is discussing policy disagreements. What we're discussing is your public influence and the timing of your statements. The room was dead quiet. Bondi flipped through her notes again, then looked up with the kind of clarity that makes people hold their breath. March 17, you said, and I quote, if you think silence is an option, you are wrong. If they want peace, we'll give them protest. If they want war, we'll give them pressure. Your exact words. That video had over 1.3 million views. 2 days later, a dealership in Eugene, Oregon was set on fire. I'm not suggesting you lit the match, but you created the atmosphere where someone did. Crockett's face changed just slightly, not panic, but calculation. I was speaking metaphorically, she said. Maybe, Bondi answered, but someone out there didn't take it that way, and now people are afraid to go to work. A murmur rose in the back. One of the committee members cleared his throat, perhaps hoping to steer the conversation back to neutral ground, but neither woman was budging. The room's oxygen had shifted again, and then Bondi delivered the hit no one expected. She reached under her folder and pulled out a printed screenshot. Here's a tweet posted by someone who followed your page the day after your live stream. It says, and I quote, "They want our silence, we'll give them smoke." That post included a picture of a Molotov cocktail. She slid the page forward. Crockett didn't touch it. That person Bondi said was arrested in Little Rock last week charged with attempted arson. He tagged your video in his post. It felt like the floor dipped for a moment. No one moved. Even the photographers stopped clicking. Crockett leaned back. "You're using this platform to publicly smear an elected official, and frankly this sounds more like political theater than justice." Bondi raised an eyebrow, but her voice didn't waver. "Theater ends when the curtain falls, but this is real. You have a right to protest, Congresswoman. No one is disputing that, but when public statements cross into influence that leads to criminal behavior, we can't just look away." The chairman banged the gavel. "Let's maintain order." Crockett pointed a finger across the desk. "You're trying to silence me." Bondi replied simply, "I'm trying to protect people." It wasn't loud, but it landed hard in the back. The Omaha man lowered his head for a moment. He wasn't thinking about politics or slogans. He was thinking about his daughter and the sound of glass breaking at 3 a.m. But the tension wasn't finished, because what happened next would take the hearing in a direction no one saw coming. The gavel hit the desk again, sharper this time. "Order, please. Let's remember why we're here," said Chairman Kilpatrick, clearly on edge now. The room had grown hot, not from temperature but from everything unsaid, everything sitting just under the surface. Crockett exhaled and sat back, hands clasped tight on the desk. She didn't speak right away. For the first time her expression flickered, not with rage but something closer to disbelief. She hadn't expected Bondi to come with specifics. She thought this was just another media jab, a political chest thumping, but Bondi had built her case like a prosecutor, and Crockett knew it. Still, backing down wasn't her nature. When Elon Musk posts conspiracy theories and mocks public servants, where's the outrage then? Crockett asked, voice lower now but still cutting. When he mocks workers, funds candidates who target women's rights, where's the condemnation for that? Or is it only certain people's words that deserve accountability? Bondi didn't answer immediately. Instead she studied Crockett for a beat. Then in a measured tone she said, "You're not on trial for criticizing Elon Musk. You're being questioned because 7 businesses were burned." And the rhetoric surrounding those events wasn't vague, it was direct, timed, emotional, and coming from someone with power. Crockett leaned forward again. "So what? People can't feel angry anymore, they can't show frustration. You're calling for sanitized speech in a time when people are being evicted, when wages are stagnant, when billionaires are buying influence and everyone else is told to be patient." Bondi kept her tone even. "People can feel whatever they want, but leaders don't just feel, they guide, and they lead with words that heal, not ignite." That one landed, not because it was loud but because it was calm, unshakable. Bondi wasn't playing for applause. She wasn't here to score points. That made her harder to attack. One of the members to the left, a quiet senator from Idaho, glanced around the room. He'd seen this kind of battle before, but something about it felt more dangerous, as if this wasn't just about Tesla or Musk or even Crockett. It was about where the line had moved and whether anyone was still watching it. Crockett's voice hardened again. "You're using the actions of a few to chill speech across the board. You're painting protest as threat. I didn't tell anyone to light anything. I called for a day of action, and if that's illegal now, then maybe you should say so outright." Bondi's response was quiet but immediate. "I never said it was illegal. I said it was irresponsible." Another pause, another silence, just long enough for the weight to settle in the room. "You know what I hear in your words," Crockett continued, "a warning to everyone who ever raised their voice, to every young woman who ever felt invisible and finally found her courage. You want them afraid, careful, silent." Bondi closed her folder softly. "No, I want them safe." And then from the gallery a voice rang out, raw, sudden, uncontrolled. "My cousin's in the hospital. He worked at the Fort Collins Tesla service center. He got beat up by a group who called him a traitor to the people. Is that what action looks like to you?" All eyes turned. A man in his early 30s, face flushed, stood shaking slightly. Security started moving toward him, but he raised his hands. "I'm not here to disrupt. I'm just tired of pretending this is normal. You want a political fight, fine, but people like my cousin, he didn't sign up to be a symbol. He was just fixing brake pads." Crockett stared at him, saying nothing. Bondi looked to the chairman. "Let him speak." The room held its breath, but the man's words had cracked something open, and what followed would shift the conversation from politics to pain. The room hadn't heard silence like this all morning. The man in the gallery, his name was Anthony Delgado, a technician from Pueblo, Colorado, lowered his arms, still breathing hard. The committee chair signaled security to stand down, and for a moment the rules bent. No one objected because it felt like finally someone wasn't speaking to win. He was speaking because he couldn't hold it in anymore. "My cousin Mateo," Anthony said, voice shaking, "was closing up last Tuesday. It was late. These guys, 4 of them, pulled up and started yelling. At first he thought it was just protesters, but then one threw a rock through the window. One of them had a tire iron. He didn't even get a chance to run. He stopped, eyes glossy, lips trembling. They said he was supporting a fascist, said they were part of a pressure movement. That's what they called it. He still got stitches in his scalp. He hasn't gone back to work. Says he's scared to even get in his car." No one moved. Even Crockett had lowered her eyes, lips pressed into a thin line. Anthony shook his head. "He's not rich. He's not political. He's just a guy who loves cars. He taught me how to rebuild an engine when I was 15. And now he's terrified because someone decided Tesla workers were the enemy. His voice cracked at the last word. Bondi didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence gave Anthony space to breathe to finish, and then unexpectedly she did something no one anticipated. She turned to the chairman with permission. I'd like to yield a portion of my time to hear more from Mr. Delgado. His perspective is relevant. Chairman Kilpatrick, startled but clearly moved, nodded slowly. Granted. Crockett shifted in her seat. For the first time she looked conflicted, torn between defending her principles and facing the very human cost. Standing just feet away, Anthony cleared his throat, looked down at his shoes, then back up. I'm not trying to blame anyone here, but when leaders talk, people listen, and some don't know how to read between the lines. They don't understand metaphors. They don't stop to think about what's peaceful and what's not. He looked at Crockett, not accusingly, just honestly. I know you didn't tell anyone to hurt Mateo. I'm not saying you did, but it started after that live stream. My aunt plays it on loop. She thinks maybe if he'd stayed home that night none of it would have happened. Maybe she's wrong, maybe not. Crockett looked away. I just wanted to stop, Anthony said quietly. Bondi spoke gently. So do I. The room exhaled. Even Chairman Kilpatrick, usually stiff as a fence post, leaned forward and rubbed his temple. Thank you, Mr. Delgado. Your words are noted. For the record, security escorted Anthony back to his seat. As he sat, his shoulders collapsed. Not in shame but in exhaustion, the kind that lives in your bones. And something shifted. It wasn't that Crockett surrendered her stance, but the fire in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by something slower, heavier, maybe guilt, maybe just realization. She adjusted her mic and spoke again, her tone lower now. Look, I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I wanted attention. I wanted people to stop ignoring what feels like economic bullying, but I see now when you speak in anger you don't always control who picks up the message. Bondi nodded once. That's the whole point. But the hearing wasn't over yet, and the most damaging evidence hadn't even been brought to the table by the time the chairman called a short recess. The temperature in the room had dropped figuratively. At least people weren't shouting anymore. They were watching, listening, processing. Bondi didn't leave her seat during the break. She stayed where she was, flipping through her notes with the same patience she walked in with. She wasn't rattled, not by Crockett's energy, not by the cameras, not even by the emotional outburst from the gallery. That steadiness, it was intentional, tactical. Every gesture, every pause had a purpose. Crockett, on the other hand, stood in pace for a moment behind her chair. Her staff whispered quickly in her ear. One aide slid a phone into her palm. A text. She read it, blinked hard, then placed it face down on the table. When the session resumed, the atmosphere was different, cooler but dense. Chairman Kilpatrick leaned into the mic. Let's return to the matter at hand. Miss Bondi, you may continue. Bondi nodded once and turned a page in her binder. I understand the argument that people in power should be open to critique, that we should be held accountable by the people we serve. I welcome that. What I don't accept is reckless influence, when your words stir something even unintentionally that ends in harm. She let the sentence breathe. Since March 17th, she continued, federal authorities have intercepted 7 threats against Tesla properties. 5 arrests have been made. 2 are pending, and in each case social media activity shows they were not operating alone. Bondi raised a printed document, another screenshot. This is from a private group chat that federal investigators access with a warrant. One of the users posted, Congresswoman Crockett says it's time to pressure them where it hurts. Let's give her a show. That same individual was arrested last week in Shreveport with homemade explosives in his car. Gasps rippled across the gallery. Crockett looked down, her fingers drummed against the table. Slow and uneven. Bondi didn't pause. You wanted to raise awareness. You succeeded, but when your message is delivered to thousands of strangers, you no longer control how it lands. That's not censorship, that's physics. The line stung because it didn't sound like a political jab. It sounded like truth. Still, Crockett wasn't ready to fold. She straightened in her seat and cleared her throat. I recognize the danger of being misinterpreted, but where was this same energy when workers were harassed for supporting unions? Where was federal protection when hospitals received bomb threats for providing reproductive care? Bondi raised her eyes. It was there. You just didn't like the headlines. A few members murmured. The tension flared again, but quickly settled. Let's not make this partisan. Bondi continued. This isn't about right or left. This is about fire, and fire doesn't care who lit it. It just spreads. For a moment no one responded. Crockett broke the silence. I'm not perfect, but I'm not a villain either. No one said you were. Bondi replied. But responsibility isn't about blame, it's about asking, could I have done better? That's the question I ask myself every day. Even Kilpatrick, who tried to remain neutral, looked moved. A long silence followed, the kind that didn't need to be filled. From the far end of the table, a representative from Ohio finally broke it. I think what's happening here is something rare, accountability from both sides. Maybe we can build from that. Crockett looked up. She didn't smile, but she didn't argue either. But the calm wasn't here to stay. Because Bondi was about to introduce the one piece of evidence that would shift the entire narrative. Pam Bondi reached for the final folder in front of her. It was thinner than the rest, just a single sheet of paper inside, but the way she picked it up carefully, deliberately, sent a signal through the room. Even Crockett shifted in her chair, sensing something heavier was about to land. Bondi held it up. This, she said, is a written affidavit from a federal investigator in Austin, Texas. It details a chain of messages exchanged in a closed Encrypted form linked to an activist collective messages that explicitly referenced Congresswoman Crockett's speech, timestamp dated and tied directly to the planning of the Fort Collins attack. Crockett's lips parted slightly, a flicker of disbelief passing over her face. These are not fringe actors. Bondi went on these individuals, organized transportation, mapped out locations, and even created a shared folder of slogans, including one lifted directly from the live stream. Peace got us nowhere, now it's time to pressure. She set the paper down carefully. The documents have been submitted to the committee, she added, for full transparency. A low rustle spread across the room, papers flipping, pens scribbling, aides whispering. Crockett's voice cut through the buzz. You're telling me that some anonymous messages are now being tied directly to me? That's how thin the line is. Bondi turned toward her slowly. I'm telling you that in this climate rhetoric matters. A tweet can become a torch, a phrase a call to action. We don't get to control how far it travels. Once it leaves our mouths. There was no anger in her tone, just finality. Crockett shook her head slowly. And I suppose this all comes down on me because I didn't spell out be peaceful in flashing lights. You didn't have to, Bondi said. You just had to understand who was listening. Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't charged with rage. It was heavy with something else, reflection. Even Crockett, whose armor had been up since the start, seemed to sit differently now. Her elbows rested on the table, hands loosely clasped. Eyes scanning the document behind her. One of her staffers whispered, "We need to issue a response," but Crockett didn't reply. She was still reading. On the far end, Representative Langston Ford from Nevada leaned into his mic. "Let's be clear, no one's accusing Congresswoman Crockett of ordering violence. What we're debating is the ripple effect of public language, especially when tensions are already high. This is a learning moment for everyone on this panel." Bondi nodded once. "Exactly." The chairman cleared his throat. "It's clear emotions are running high, but I think what we've witnessed here is rare. Two powerful voices, both convinced they're doing what's right, forced to confront the unintended consequences of their actions." Crockett finally spoke again. "I'm not going to sit here and pretend I got everything right," she said. "I spoke from frustration, from years of seeing communities ignored while billionaires buy louder microphones. But if someone took my words and turned them into vile sin and an immense, then yeah, I'll own my part. I didn't mean for that, but I get it now. There it was, no grandstanding, no spin, just a raw sentence dropped into the center of the room like a stone." Bondi nodded again. "That's all I was asking for. It wasn't a handshake, it wasn't a hug, but it was enough." In the gallery, Anthony Delgado watched the exchange with tired eyes. He wasn't thinking about party lines or polling numbers. He was thinking about his cousin Mateo, and maybe for the first time feeling like someone actually heard him. But even as the hearing drew to a close, the question lingered. What would they do with this moment once the cameras turned off? The cameras were still rolling, but the fire was gone. The hearing had shifted from conflict to clarity, at least for now. Chairman Kilpatrick glanced around the room and spoke into the mic one last time. "This committee appreciates the testimony provided. This hearing is now adjourned." With a sharp crack of the gavel, it was over. The room didn't immediately empty. People moved slowly, as if unsure how to carry what they just witnessed. It hadn't ended in shouting, it hadn't ended in triumph or defeat, it ended in something more rare, a moment where accountability didn't look like punishment but understanding. Pam Bondi remained seated as others stood and stretched. She took a moment to slide her documents back into her folder, careful, quiet. Then she stood, collected her bag, and began walking toward the exit. Halfway down the hallway, a young woman fell into step beside her, fresh out of college, notepad tucked under one arm, eyes bright with nervous energy. Her name was Denise Ward, one of the new interns assigned to the Justice Department's media team. "Miss Bondi?" she asked, unsure if it was the right moment. Bondi glanced sideways. "Yes, I just wanted to say I didn't expect today to go like that. Not with Congresswoman Crockett. I thought it would all explode." Pam gave a small laugh, not unkindly. "It nearly did." Denise nodded. "You kept your cool though, even when it got personal." Bondi stopped walking, looked the young woman directly in the eye. "When it gets personal, that's when you stay calm, because anger is easy, blame is easy, but leadership, that takes control." Denise looked down, nodded again, processing. Bondi continued walking. "I've been in rooms like this before. Tempers flare, cameras flash, but most people forget what was said 2 hours later unless you say something that makes them think. A pause, and I think we did that today." At the far end of the hall, Crockett stepped out from a side room, her staff forming a protective wall around her. Her face was neutral, tired. She spotted Bondi from a distance. Just for a second their eyes met, no words exchanged, but something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not friendship, just recognition. Later that evening, news outlets were divided. Some headlines praised Bondi's composure and clarity, others focused on Crockett's refusal to back down. The usual storm, the usual noise, but in small corners of the internet, in a few Reddit threads, group chats, and text chains, people weren't yelling, they were asking real questions about responsibility, about influence, about what leadership actually means. Back in her office, Bondi kicked off her heels and sat on the edge of her desk. The lights were dim, just her and the sound of the city murmuring outside. Denise stood in the doorway holding her laptop. "Do you want to approve the draft press release?" Pam shook her head. "No, not yet." She looked out the window. Somewhere someone was watching a clip from the hearing. Someone else was probably arguing over it. That was fine. What mattered wasn't the reaction, it was the lesson. "You know what matters, Denise?" She said, finally, not being right, not being the loudest, just making sure your words don't end up hurting someone you'll never meet. Denise nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. Bondi stood up, gathering her bag. Get some rest, we've got a long week ahead. And with that she stepped out into the corridor, past the reporters, past the cameras, past the noise. This time she didn't say a word, because some is when it's real. Silence is the loudest answer you can give. If this hearing taught us anything, it's this: words are tools. They can build bridges or they can spark fires, and the people holding the mic have a choice every time. If you found something meaningful in this story, something worth thinking about, then take a second to subscribe. These are the moments we should all be paying attention to.